Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something pretty fascinating. The world of elite football psychology. Specifically, that stark difference you see between the, let's say, really bland interviews players give.
Oh yeah, the classic 30-second post-match cliche fest.
Exactly. Compared to how open and honestly sometimes raw they become years later, maybe on podcasts or in books.
It's a huge contrast, isn't it? And that's what our source material really digs into. We're looking at this really guarded culture, trying to understand the mindset, the media shifts, and what happens after the final whistle blows for good. Like a shortcut to figuring out what it really costs to reach the absolute top.
Okay, so let's start there with that guardedness. Why were players, historically so, well, secretive, so careful, it often felt intentionally boring?
Oh, it absolutely was intentional. You have to remember the media landscape back then. It was basically about survival.
Survival.
Yeah, the main goal was just get through it. Get through the interview. Don't say anything remotely controversial because the press, especially the big newspapers, they held all the cards.
Meaning they could twist things.
Completely. Players lived in fear that some offhand comment, maybe even a joke, would be ripped out of context,
Yeah.
turned into some massive sensational headline, especially, before a big derby match, just to wind up the opposition fan.
Right, so it wasn't really about being professional and reserved. It was more like a defensive shield.
Precisely. A shield to stop controversy that could mess things up for the whole team. But, and this is the interesting part, that whole dynamic is flipped now.
How so?
Well, you've got new platforms, podcasts, obviously, social media, too. These give players, current ones and especially retired ones, a direct line. They can finally show who they really are.
So they can bypass the traditional media gatekeepers.
Exactly. If some negative story pops up, or even if they just want to talk, they don't have to go through the pundits who often still expect that cautious, guarded approach. They can speak straight to the fans.
And it's that shift, that opening up, that lets us really see the psychological side, the potential cost of all that success. We tend to think elite player, we think glory, trophies, happiness, maybe?
Yeah, but the sources we looked at paint a very different picture for the truly elite. It's crucial to make a distinction here.
Okay.
There are very successful players, guys who had fantastic careers, won things, seemed to enjoy it. And then there's the next level, the absolute elite. Think Gerrard, Lampard, Rooney, Terry, Ferdinand, those types.
The icons.
Right. And according to people who knew them well, watched them day in, day out, these players did not look like they enjoyed it ever.
Wow. That's kind of heavy. If you're at the absolute pinnacle, why no enjoyment?
Because enjoyment wasn't the point. Improvement was. Their focus was relentlessly forward, always the next thing. They were almost hardwired to find the negative, the thing to fix, even right after a massive win.
Like the source mentioned, Liverpool's 2005 Champions League win, an incredible comeback, but
But yeah, behind the scenes, the talk was often about how they weren't actually the best team, technically. They won it through sheer force of will, that relentless competitive drive from players like Gerrard and Carragher. It was about hating to lose more than loving to win.
so it's like the fear of failure or even just complacency is a stronger motivator than the thrill of victory, a sort of negative bias driving them.
It really seems that way. And this mindset, this intense competitive focus, it doesn't just stop at the training ground gate.
It spills over.
Massively. Our sources talk about how it bleeds into their personal lives because winning matters above all else, to the point where some admitted they wouldn't even let their own kids win at games.
Seriously, not even board games.
Apparently not. It was framed as, teaching them a lesson about the real world. Winning is what counts.
That really shows the tension between achieving that external objective success and maybe sacrificing personal happiness or just normal family life.
Absolutely. And you see that singular drive perfectly in someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, even from a young age.
Right. The sources mentioned him stating his ambition very early on.
Yeah, at like 21, 22, he was already openly saying his goal was to be the best player in the world. And everything was geared toward that. His training, his diet, his whole life. It required immense sacrifice. Success at that level isn't about being well-rounded. It's about that laser focus.
And that laser focus, that individual drive, must have been amplified by the environment they were in, right? Which brings us to the classic Premier League dressing room culture. What did the sources say about that?
Oh, it was described as pretty brutal. A macho, dog-eat-dog world. The unwritten rule was basically any weakness is preyed upon.
So if you were struggling Mentally, maybe?
Forget about it.
Yeah.
If you went to the manager back then saying you were struggling, the response was likely immediate and harsh. Well, your traps then obviously can't handle it. Showing any kind of vulnerability was just not an option.
Was there seen to be any upside to that, or just pure pressure?
I think, in their view, it maintained intensity. It was like a tough enforcement mechanism for that relentless focus we talked about. But the personal cost was huge, especially for players maybe from working class backgrounds, less formal education, suddenly thrust into press conferences almost designed to trip them up.
Yeah, designed to create conflict for the headlines.
Exactly. And the stakes are just so much higher in football compared to, say, individual sports.
How do you mean?
Well, a boxer or a UFC fighter can talk trash, build hype. It's part of the game, sells the fight. If they lose, okay, they lose. But if a footballer says something controversial,
It affects the whole team.
right, it puts like 10 other guys on the pitch under pressure. It gives the opposition motivation, maybe even jeopardizes the team's whole season. It has a massive blast radius.
So you could only really get away with bravado if you were genuinely exceptional, like a Zlatan Ibrahimovic or...
Or a Floyd Mayweather in boxing, someone who consistently backed it up. Otherwise, you just set yourself up to be knocked down. And one source pointed out a specific cultural thing, especially in England, of seemingly loving it when people fail after talking big.
That sense of schadenfreude, yeah. You have to be humble unless you're untouchable.
Pretty much. But it's important to say that culture is changing. That old school, very English, sometimes heavy drinking culture, it shifted.
How so?
The modern dressing room is described as superbly diverse, much more multicultural, different religions, different backgrounds, integrated way better than before. It's not the same monolithic environment it once was.
Okay, so there's progress, more diversity, maybe more understanding. Yet, there's one area where the silence is, frankly, deafening, and that's sexuality.
Yeah, the statistic from the sources is genuinely stark. You look at the Premier League, maybe 600, 650 active players across first teams and senior U21s, and publicly out gay players.
Zero.
Zero. And statistically, based on the general population, you'd expect somewhere between, conservatively, 20 and 35 gay or bisexual players. And this isn't just an English thing. It's the same across all the major European leagues. The silence is overwhelming.
So, if the dressing rooms are potentially more supportive now, as suggested, why do you think we still see this universal silence at the elite level?
It seems to circle back to that core elite mindset we discussed, the absolute focus on performance. The primary fear probably isn't homophobic abuse within the team anymore, or not primarily. It's the fear of becoming a major distraction.
A distraction from the football.
Exactly. These guys are paid enormous amounts to do one job, perform on the pitch. Coming out would be completely uncharted territory at that level. It would bring immense media attention, not just on the player, but the whole club, the team. It becomes this huge thing separate from football.
So it's like an optimization choice, sacrificing that personal authenticity to maintain maximum professional focus and avoid disruption.
That seems to be the calculation. Yeah. Look at the example of Thomas Hitzelsberger. The source mentions playing with him. He seemed well-liked, respected.
But he only came out after retiring.
Right. And when he did, he received massive support, which is great, but it highlights the issue. The support might be there after, or even during in private, but taking that step while playing, becoming the absolute center of a global media storm. For players conditioned to that laser focus, it's just too big a professional risk. The system implicitly prioritizes performance over personal openness.
Okay, let's shift then to what happens when that system, that intense structure, suddenly disappears. Post-retirement, it's not just adjusting to normal life. The sources paint a picture of a real crisis.
It's more than a crisis. It's devastating for many. That statistic.
Yeah.
Around 40% of Premier League players go bankrupt within 5 years of retiring.
40%, that's staggering. What drives that? Is it just bad investments?
That's part of it, definitely. Bad advice, maybe from sharks hanging around clubs, poor financial decisions.
Yeah.
But the sources suggest the root cause is often deeper. It's psychological. They lose everything overnight. The structure, the routine, the adrenaline, the team environment they've known since they were kids, it's gone. And that man-up culture we talked about, it means they have absolutely zero tools to cope with that loss.
Because they've spent decades learning not to show weakness, not to ask for help.
Precisely. So when their identity vanishes, when the purpose disappears, any underlying mental fragility comes rushing to the surface. But they're completely unequipped to deal with it. They don't know how to seek help.
And the consequences can be incredibly serious.
Horrifyingly so. The source material mentions the person being interviewed knew 3 former teammates who attempted suicide after retiring. Lee Hendry and Clark Carlisle are named as 2 who spoke publicly about their struggles. It's not just about money, it's a profound mental health emergency linked directly back to that culture of emotional suppression.
And on top of that mental toll, there's the growing awareness of the physical dangers long term. Specifically, the link between heading the ball and brain injuries like CTE and dementia.
Yeah, that's a huge concern now, and rightly so. Yeah. There's a really vivid anecdote in the sources that sticks with you.
What was that?
A player, recalling being a young teenager, training involved heading the ball over and over again multiple times a week until he literally saw stars.
Saw stars, as in felt dazed.
Yeah. And back then, that wasn't seen as dangerous. It was seen as dedication, toughness, getting better, not as potentially causing repeated microconcussions.
That's terrifying thinking how widespread that must have been. Is that changing now?
Thankfully, yes. The science is undeniable now, so you're seeing interventions, like rules about kids under a certain age not being allowed to head the ball in training or matches. It's a necessary acknowledgement that some of those old-school toughness practices were causing real lasting harm.
Given this backdrop of intense pressure suppression and post-career struggles, the discussion in the sources about humor and adaptability feels really key. One player described humor almost as his superpower. How did that come about?
Well, interestingly, it apparently started as a defense mechanism. He felt he didn't look like any normal footballer, physically maybe, so he used humor to laugh at himself first before others could.
Sort of preempting the criticism?
Exactly. But then it evolved into something more positive. It became a way to connect, maybe lighten the mood in that hyper-serious environment. A refreshing change, as he put it.
And it clearly resonated. The source mentioned people still asking him to do the robot dance decades later.
Yeah. It shows how that bit of personality, that authenticity, stuck.
Yeah.
And it points to a really important contrast, I think.
Which is?
That laser-focused philosophy is probably necessary to reach the absolute elite level of performance. But for actual life, for long-term well-being, you need adaptability. You need to be able to laugh to enjoy the ride sometimes. True success can't just be medals and stats. Surely happiness has to be part of the equation.
And it's interesting because despite all the harshness we've discussed, the sources also acknowledge that football itself, the game, often served as a kind of sanctuary.
Absolutely. For many players, especially those from difficult backgrounds, stepping onto the pitch or the training ground was like leaving all their other problems at the gate.
A release.
Yeah, a space where just for a while they could almost feel like a kid again, just playing. It provided focus, structure, a place where their intense dedication did bring clear rewards. Even if the wider culture discouraged dealing with emotions off the field, the game itself could be a refuge.
So, wrapping this all up, what's the core takeaway from this deep dive into the sources? It seems like this elite football culture creates incredible athletes through intense focus and emotional control.
But that very same system can leave them incredibly vulnerable later on. It demands they suppress so much for success, only for them to struggle profoundly when that structure and maybe that suppression mechanism is removed.
It's a stark paradox.
It really is. If the relentless chase for success makes you fundamentally unhappy, you're basically sacrificing the very thing happiness that success is supposed to help you achieve. Which leads to a pretty pointed question for you, the listener, to think about. Where in your own life, maybe in your career or personal goals, are you so focused on the next thing, the outcome, the win, that you might be forgetting to actually experience and maybe even enjoy the journey you're on right now?